I always assumed ruin would sound like a car crash or a siren, loud and violent. I never imagined it would arrive quietly on a Tuesday. Taped to my front door in Briar Glen, the certified envelope felt light in my hand, but the number printed inside was heavy enough to crush me. $247,000. It wasn't just a tax bill. It was the price tag on a betrayal I hadn't even discovered yet. The peace I had built in Briar Glen was a fragile architecture, constructed of quiet evenings, a steady paycheck, and the distinct absence of drama. I was 33 years old. I paid my rent on the first of the month. I kept my credit card balances at zero, and I never let my phone battery dip below 20%. I was a professional. I was reliable. I was safe. That safety evaporated on a Tuesday evening in late October. I was coming home from my job at Crestline Medical Systems, balancing a bag of groceries and my laptop case, thinking about nothing more significant than whether to make pasta or a salad. I turned the corner of the hallway toward apartment 4B, and there it was. It was not in my mailbox, where polite correspondence went. It was taped to my door at eye level. The envelope was white, thin, and aggressively official. The words Internal Revenue Service were printed in the upper left corner, and below that, a block of text in bold uppercase letters warned of consequences for obstruction. A green certified mail receipt adhered to the front, demanding a signature that the postal carrier had evidently decided to bypass in favor of public shaming. I stood there for a long moment, the grocery bag cutting into my fingers. My first instinct was a foolish, childlike hope. Maybe they sent a refund to the wrong address. I unlocked the door, dropped my things on the kitchen island, and peeled the tape off the envelope. The sound of the paper tearing was the loudest thing in the apartment. My hands were not shaking yet. That would come later. I pulled out the letter. It was a notice of intent to levy. The numbers were bold and black, centered on the page like a tombstone. The IRS claimed I owed $247,000 in unpaid payroll taxes, penalties, and interest. The air left my lungs. I sat down on the floor, right there in the entryway, my coat still buttoned. I read the name on the notice again. Gabriella Butler. My social security number was masked, but the last 4 digits were mine. The address was mine. But the liability was attached to an entity I had never heard of. Hearthstone Ledger Works, LLC. I read the paragraph twice. The government was giving me 30 days to pay $250,000, or they would begin seizing assets, bank accounts, wages, property. I stared at the wall. I did not own a business. I had never owned a business. I was a mid-level analyst for a medical supply company. I filed my 1040EZ every April and complained when I owed a few $100s. This had to be a mistake. It had to be a clerical error, a crossed wire in the massive, grinding machine of the federal bureaucracy. I looked at the clock. It was 6:15 in the evening. The IRS phone lines were closed. That night, I did not eat the pasta or the salad. I sat on my beige sofa, the letter on the coffee table, watching the digital clock on the cable box tick forward. Every minute felt like a physical weight. I tried to rationalize it. Identity theft. Perhaps someone had stolen my number. I would call in the morning, explain the error, and they would apologize. But deep down, in the pit of my stomach, a cold knot was tightening. The name of the business bothered me. Hearthstone Ledger Works. It sounded old-fashioned, rural. It sounded like Merriwick. Merriwick was the town where I grew up, 3 hours west of Briar Glen. It was a place of rusted sedans, fading industry, and my parents. I hadn't lived there in a decade, and I visited only when obligation outweighed my desire for peace. I barely slept. When I did, I dreamed of invisible hands reaching into my purse, taking my wallet, taking my keys, taking the skin off my bones. I called the number on the notice at exactly 8 in the morning. I spent 45 minutes on hold, listening to a looped symphonic track that sounded like it was being played underwater. When a human finally answered, her voice was flat, stripped of all empathy. Agent Miller. She called herself. I explained the situation. I kept my voice level. the way I did in meetings at Crestline. I told her there was a mistake. I told her I was just an employee at a medical firm. I told her I did not know what Hearthstone LedgerWorks was. Agent Miller did not sound impressed. "Ma'am, the IRS does not assign the trust fund recovery penalty randomly," she said. "You are listed as a responsible party, an officer." I gripped the phone. "I am not an officer," I said, my voice rising slightly. "I have never signed anything for a company called Hearthstone LedgerWorks. Our records show you are the 90% owner and managing member," she said. "The business address is in Merriwick. The initial filing dates back 2 years. 2 years?" I felt the room tilt. Agent Miller continued, sounding bored. "We sent notices to the business address. We sent notices to the residence on file in Merriwick. We received no response. That is why we are now contacting you at your current residence. The liability has moved to the collection phase." "Where in Merriwick?" I asked. The question came out as a whisper. She read the address. It was my parents' house. I hung up the phone without saying goodbye. I sat in my kitchen, the morning sun hitting the granite countertops, feeling a nausea so profound I thought I might be sick. Then, my phone buzzed on the counter. It was a notification from my credit monitoring app. Usually, these were mundane alerts, a balance decrease, a routine inquiry. I picked it up, hoping for a distraction. Alert. New collection account added. I tapped the screen. The app loaded slowly, the little wheel spinning. When the report populated, a red flag appeared at the top. A collection agency had posted a debt of $12,000 for unpaid office equipment leases. The date was yesterday. The reality of it hit me then. This wasn't just a letter. This wasn't a threat of something that might happen. It was already happening. The wall I had built between my life and my past had been breached. I called out sick to work. I couldn't focus on spreadsheets when my entire financial existence was dissolving. I packed a bag. I didn't know how long I would be gone, but I knew I couldn't resolve this over the phone. I needed to see faces. The drive to Merriwick usually took 3 hours, but I made it in 2.5. I drove with the radio off, the silence inside the car amplifying the racing thoughts in my head. They wouldn't. I told myself they couldn't. My parents, David and Susan Butler, were chaotic people. They were bad with money, prone to get-rich-quick schemes, and perpetually the victims of bad luck. But they were my parents. They had come to my college graduation. They sent me birthday cards signed with emphatic love. They weren't criminals. I turned off the highway and onto the winding 2-lane road that led into town. Merriwick looked the same as always, gray, tired, and clinging to the past. I passed the old mill, now a hollow shell, and the row of storefronts that were mostly empty. I pulled into the driveway of the house I grew up in. It was a split-level ranch that had needed a new coat of paint since I was in high school. The grass was overgrown. My father's truck was in the driveway, alongside my mother's sedan. I sat in the car for a moment, gripping the steering wheel. I needed to be calm. If I went in screaming, they would shut down. They would play the victim. I needed answers. I walked up the front steps and let myself in. The door was unlocked. It was always unlocked. The smell hit me first. A mix of old paper, potpourri, and cigarette smoke. My father had quit smoking 5 years ago, but the house never forgot. "Mom? Dad?" I called out. "Gabriella?" My mother's voice came from the kitchen. "Is that you? You didn't say you were coming." I walked into the kitchen. My mother was standing at the sink, washing lettuce. She looked older than the last time I had seen her. Her shoulders hunched. My father was sitting at the round wooden table, reading a newspaper, a mug of coffee in front of him. They looked so normal. It was infuriating. I didn't say hello. I reached into my bag and pulled out the IRS letter. I slammed it down on the table, right on top of the sports section. "What is this?" I asked. My father looked up, startled. He adjusted his glasses. "Hello to you too." "Gabby," he said, his voice gruff. "Read it," I said. He picked up the letter. I watched his eyes scan the page. I saw the moment he recognized it. His jaw tightened. Just a fraction. He didn't look shocked. He looked annoyed. He tossed the letter back onto the table. "It is nothing," he said. "Just bureaucracy." "Nothing?" I repeated. "It says I owe $250,000. Dad, it says I own a business called Hearthstone Ledger Works." My mother wiped her hands on a dish towel and walked over. She didn't look at the letter. She looked at me, her eyes wide and wet. "Oh, Gabriella," she said, "you know how the government is. They make mistakes. It is just paperwork confusion." I looked between them. "Paperwork confusion doesn't list me as a managing member." I said, "I called them. They said notices were sent here. To this house. Why didn't you tell me?" My father waved a hand dismissively. "We handled it," he said. "We have a guy working on it. Cliff. You remember Cliff Hargrove? He is a consultant. He said these letters are automatic. You just ignore the first few, and then you negotiate." "Ignore them?" I felt my voice rising, vibrating in my chest. "You can't ignore the IRS, Dad. And why is my name on it? Why am I the officer?" "We needed a name for the paperwork," my mother said softly. "Just to get things started. Your credit is so good. Gabby, we couldn't use ours. You know about your father's bankruptcy." She said it casually, as if borrowing my identity was the same as borrowing a cup of sugar. "You used my social security number." I said, "Without asking me. We didn't think it would matter," my father snapped. He stood up, his chair scraping against the linoleum. "We are a family. We do what we have to do to keep the family afloat. The business was supposed to take off. We were going to pay everything back before you even knew. Before I even knew." The betrayal hit me then, sharp and clear. They hadn't just made a mistake. They had made a plan that relied on my ignorance. I looked around the kitchen, feeling like a stranger in a museum of my own life. My eyes landed on the counter near the fridge. There was a stack of mail there. A chaotic pile of flyers, bills, and catalogs. But something caught my eye, a flash of white and green. I walked over to the counter. My mother tried to intercept me. "Gabby, don't," she started. But I stepped around her. I grabbed the stack. I shuffled through it. Capital One, addressed to Gabriella Butler. Chase Business Banking, addressed to Gabriella Butler. Internal Revenue Service, addressed to Gabriella Butler. All of them were sent to this address, 14 Maple Street, Marowak. I felt cold all over. "You changed my address," I whispered. "You redirected my mail." My mother started to cry. It was a practice sound, a soft, wounded whimpering that usually made me crumble. "We didn't want you to worry," she sobbed. "We wanted to protect you from the stress until we fixed it." "Protect me?" I held up the envelopes. "You stole from me. This is fraud. This is identity theft." My father slammed his hand on the table. "Watch your mouth," he shouted. "After everything we did for you? Who paid for your braces? Who co-signed your first car? You are being disrespectful. Gabriella, we are your parents. The old triggers were there. The demand for gratitude. The framing of abuse as sacrifice. But this time, the number $247,000 was floating in the air between us. "I want to see the documents," I said. I was shaking now, my hands trembling as I held the stolen mail. "Show me the business filings. Show me the bank accounts." "No," my father said. "What? You are too emotional right now," he said, crossing his arms. "You are panicking. I am not going to let you tear this family apart because of a little panic. Cliff is handling it. When it is resolved, we will show you." I looked at my mother. She was studying the floor tiles, refusing to meet my eyes. "I am not asking." I said, "Then leave." My father said, "If you are going to come into my house and accuse me of being a criminal, you can get out." I stood there for a long moment. I realized then that they weren't going to fix this. They weren't going to apologize. They were banking on the fact that I was their daughter, and that daughters don't send their parents to prison. I threw the stack of mail onto the table. It slid across the surface and scattered onto the floor. I turned around and walked out. I didn't drive back to Briar Glen immediately. I drove to the gas station at the edge of town and sat in my car, hyperventilating. I needed to know the scope of it. I needed to see what they were hiding. I pulled out my laptop. I tethered it to my phone's hotspot. I went to the annual credit report website. I answered the security questions. My first car. My high school mascot. I pulled the full report. It was a bloodbath. There was a line of credit inquiry from 6 months ago. Northline Cooperative. The status was open. With a balance of $40,000, there was a credit card issued by a bank I didn't bank with. Balance, $15,000. And then I went to the Secretary of State's business registry. I searched for Hearthstone Ledger Works, LLC. There it was. Formed 2 years ago. Registered agent, Cliff Hargrove. Managing member, Gabriella Butler. I clicked on the PDF of the filing document. I zoomed in on the signature line. There was my name, Gabriella Butler. The handwriting was looped and slanted. It looked like mine. It looked enough like mine to pass a casual glance. But I knew the way I crossed my T's. I knew the way I finished my R's. This wasn't my hand. It was my mother's. She used to practice my signature when I was in high school, signing permission slips when I forgot them on the counter. We used to laugh about it. "I can be you better than you can," she would say. I closed the laptop. I felt sick. This wasn't an overnight disaster. This was a construction project. They had been building this cage for me for 2 years. Brick by brick, lie by lie. They had used my credit score, my name, my reputation, to fund a business that was now collapsing, and they had timed it so that when the walls fell, they would fall on me. I drove back to Briar Glen in a haze. The road blurred. I kept hearing my father's voice. We did this to keep the family afloat. They were drowning, so they decided to use me as a raft. The next morning, I did the only thing I could think of. I searched for tax attorneys. I couldn't afford a high-end firm, not with a $250,000 debt hanging over me. I found a local firm called Red Juniper Tax Counsel. They had decent reviews and offered a free initial consultation. I took a half-day off work. I put on my best blazer, trying to look like the professional I was supposed to be, not the victim I felt like. The office was in a strip mall, sandwiched between a chiropractor and a dry cleaner. The waiting room smelled of stale coffee and industrial carpet cleaner. I met with a man named Mr. Henderson. He was older, with a kind face and weary eyes. He listened as I explained the situation. I showed him the notice. I showed him the credit report. I told him about the redirected mail, though I felt a flush of shame admitting that my parents were the culprits. Mr. Henderson took notes on a yellow legal pad. When I finished, he set his pen down and looked at me over his reading glasses. "Gabriella," he said. His voice was gentle, but the words were sharp. "You need to understand how the IRS views this. Payroll taxes are trust fund taxes. That money belongs to the employees and the government. When it is not paid, the IRS pierces the corporate veil. They look for the person with the power to control the finances. But I didn't control them." I said, "I didn't even know the business existed. The paperwork says you did." He said, "You are listed as the managing member. You are the responsible party. To the IRS, you are the boss." He leaned forward. "I can help you fight this," he said. "We can file for innocent spouse relief. Or more likely, we can challenge the assessment based on identity theft. But you need to be very clear with me before we start." He looked me dead in the eye. "Are you sure you never signed anything?" he asked. "Not one piece of paper? Not one power of attorney? Because if you signed a single document that gave them authorization, even if you didn't read it, even if you trusted them, then this debt is yours." I opened my mouth to say no, and then I stopped. I thought about Christmas 3 years ago. I thought about the chaotic pile of papers on the dining room table. I thought about my father saying, "Just sign this insurance form for the car." Honey, I thought about how much I wanted to please them, how much I wanted to be the good daughter. A wave of cold sweat broke out on my neck. I don't think so," I stammered. "Mr. Henderson didn't look reassured. He looked like he had seen this before. I walked out of the office 20 minutes later. I sat in my car in the parking lot, gripping the steering wheel until my knuckles turned white. I watched the people walking into the dry cleaners. They looked so normal. They were worrying about stains on their shirts, They weren't worrying about federal prison. I closed my eyes. I was 33 years old. I had done everything right. And yet, I was sitting in a strip mall parking lot, nauseous, realizing that the people who were supposed to love me the most had sold me out for a line of credit. And the worst part was, I wasn't sure if I could prove it without destroying them, or if I had already destroyed myself by trusting them in the first place. I put the car in reverse. I had to go back to work. I had to pretend everything was fine. But as I pulled out onto the main road, I knew that Gabriella Butler, the steady private professional, was gone. She had been replaced by a defendant. Mr. Henderson sat across from me in his small, wood-paneled office. His hands folded over a file that contained the wreckage of my financial life. The air conditioner in the window unit rattled rhythmically, a mechanical counterpoint to the thumping of my own heart. He had asked me to come back in after reviewing the initial notice, and the look on his face told me that the news was not going to be good. "Gabriella," he began, his voice dropping an octave, as if he were a doctor delivering a terminal diagnosis. "We need to talk about the specific nature of this debt. This is not standard income tax. This is not a mistake where you forgot to report a 1099 form." I nodded, my throat tight. I knew the number. $247,000. It was burned into my retinas. "It is worse than the number," he said. He opened the file and tapped a specific line on the IRS transcript he had pulled. The liability stems from unpaid payroll taxes, withholding taxes, Social Security, and Medicare. I stared at him blankly. "I don't understand. Let me explain it in plain language," he said. "When a business pays employees, they withhold a portion of that money to send to the government. That money does not belong to the business. It belongs to the employee, and it belongs to the United States Treasury. The business is just holding it in trust." He paused to let that sink in. Hearthstone Ledger Works withheld that money from its employees' paychecks. He continued, "But instead of sending it to the IRS, they kept it. They spent it, in the eyes of the law. That is not just debt, that is theft." I felt the blood drain from my face. "Theft, because it is considered theft," he said. "The IRS does not treat it like a normal corporate bankruptcy. They can pierce the corporate veil. They look for a human being to punish. They look for the responsible party, the person who had the authority to sign checks, the person who had the duty to pay." He turned the document around so I could read it, and right here, listed as the 100% responsible officer, is you. I stared at my name. It looked alien, detached from me, yet damning. "Even if you never earned a dime," "Mr." Henderson said softly, "even if you never stepped foot in the office, if the paperwork says you were the officer and you had the power to direct funds, the IRS can come after your personal assets to recover that trust fund money. They can take your house. They can garnish your wages. They can levy your bank accounts. They do not need a court order for this, Gabriella. They already have the authority. My parents did this." I whispered, "My parents stole money from their employees and put my name on the receipt." "Mr." Henderson leaned back. "That is what we need to prove, but I have to warn you. Proving that usually means pointing the finger at the people who actually did it. And if you prove you are innocent, the liability snaps back to them. And since this involves trust fund taxes—" He didn't finish the sentence, but he didn't have to. The word criminal hung in the air between us, heavy and unspoken. I left his office with a stack of account transcripts he had pulled for me. I sat in my car and read them, forcing myself to look at the timeline of destruction. It was worse than I thought. The transcripts showed a history of correspondence. The IRS hadn't just woken up yesterday. They had been sending warning letters for 14 months. Notice CP-504, Notice of Intent to Levy, sent 8 months ago. Letter 1058, Final Notice, sent 3 months ago. I looked at the address column. Every single one of them was addressed to Gabriella Butler, but not at my apartment in Briar Glen. They were addressed to P.O. Box 404, Merriwick, State of Ohio. I didn't have a P.O. Box. My hands shook as I held the paper. Someone had not only used my name to open the business, They had deliberately established a separate mailing address to ensure I never saw the warnings. This wasn't negligence. My mother had said it was paperwork confusion. My father had said they were handling it. This was a containment strategy. They had routed the disaster to a box I didn't have a key to, letting the bomb tick down in the dark while I went to work, saved for retirement, and called them on Sundays to ask how they were doing. I drove straight to the Briar Glen police station. The lobby was sterile, smelling of floor wax and stale coffee. I approached the glass partition. The officer on duty was a young man with a buzz cut and a look of boredom that suggested he spent most of his day filing traffic accident reports. "I need to file a report for identity theft," I said. He slid a clipboard under the glass without looking up. "Fill this out. Bring it back when you're done." I sat on a hard plastic bench and stared at the form. Name of victim. That was easy. Name of suspect. I held the pen over the line. My hand hovered there. David and Susan Butler. I couldn't write it. I physically couldn't make the ink touch the paper. These were the people who had taught me to tie my shoes, who had sat in the front row of my high school graduation. Writing their names on a police report felt like violating a natural law. I wrote unknown on the suspect line. When I brought it back, the officer looked it over. He paused at the description of the incident. "Tax fraud?" he asked. "Business identity theft?" "Yes." I said, "Someone opened a business in my name in Merriwick." He looked at me, his eyes narrowing slightly. "Merriwick? That's not far. Do you have family there?" I hesitated. "Yes, my parents live there." He sighed. He put the pen down. "Ma'am, look, I can file this. But I need to be honest with you. 90% of the time, when we see this kind of thing, business fraud, tax stuff, it's family. And if it's family, the district attorney usually hates touching it unless you are willing to go all the way." "What does that mean?" I asked. "It means you can't just file a report to get the IRS off your back and then refuse to press charges later." He said, "If this is fraud, it's a crime. If you tell the feds it wasn't you, you are telling them it was someone else, and if that someone else is your mom and dad." He let the sentence trail off. "It gets messy fast." He finished. I felt a knot tighten in my stomach, hard and cold. I filed the report anyway. I left with a folded pink carbon copy and a case number that felt less like a shield and more like a weapon I wasn't sure I could pull the trigger on. That night, I couldn't sleep. The silence of my apartment felt oppressive. I opened my laptop and started digging. If the police wouldn't look until I gave them a name, I would find the evidence myself. I went to the Secretary of State's business search portal again. I paid the $20 fee to download the original Articles of Organization for Hearthstone Ledgerworks, LLC. The document downloaded slowly. I opened the PDF. There it was, the birth certificate of the lie. Date of formation, November 12th, 2 years ago. I scanned down to the signature block, Gabriella Butler, managing member. I zoomed in on the signature. It was a digital signature, but it was based on a handwritten scan. It looped the G in Gabriella with a large, sweeping flourish. It crossed the TT in Butler with a single, sharp slash. It looked remarkably like my signature. It was close enough to fool a bank teller. It was close enough to fool a vendor. But it wasn't mine. I didn't loop my G like that. I had stopped doing that in college. And then I looked at the date next to the signature, November 12th. I checked my digital calendar, scrolling back 2 years. Where was I on November 12th? I stared at the entry, urgent care, Sarah's ankle. I remembered it vividly. My best friend Sarah had slipped on ice outside her apartment complex. I had spent 6 hours in the emergency room waiting area with her, holding her purse while she got x-rays. I had been in Briar Glen, 3 hours away from Merriwick, surrounded by nurses and vending machines. I hadn't signed a business incorporation document. I hadn't been anywhere near a notary. The signature was a forgery, and it was a good one, a practiced one. I picked up my phone. It was late, almost 10 at night, but I didn't care. I dialed my father's number. He answered on the 3rd ring. "Hello?" "Dad," I said. I didn't offer a greeting. I'm looking at the articles of organization for Hearthstone Ledger Works. There was a pause, a long, heavy silence. Gabby, it's late, he said finally. Can we not do this right now? It was signed on November 12th, 2 years ago. I said, Who signed it? Gabriella. Stop, he said. Who signed it? Dad? It looks like my signature. But I was in the ER with Sarah that day. I have the timestamp on my parking receipt. I keep everything for taxes, remember? You taught me that. His voice changed. It shifted from weary to defensive. You signed it. Gabriella. Don't you remember? I froze. We sent it to you. He said, You printed it out, signed it, and mailed it back. You probably just forgot. You were so busy back then. You were always complaining about work. It's easy to forget a piece of paper. I felt a momentary flicker of doubt. Did I? Was it possible? The mind is a fragile thing. Maybe I had signed something in a rush, thinking it was for their insurance, or a cosign for a car. No. I looked at the calendar entry again. ER with Sarah. I remembered the smell of the antiseptic. I remembered the terrible coffee. I remembered texting my mom that I wouldn't be able to call that night because I was at the hospital. I checked my text history. I scrolled back. Thousands of messages. November 12th, 6:42 p.m. Meet a mom. Still at the ER with Sarah. Going to be a late night. Love you. Mom to me. Oh no. Hope she's okay. Don't worry about calling. Get some rest. I didn't sign it. Dad, I said, my voice steadying. I have the texts. I wasn't even home to receive mail. And I certainly didn't notarize it. Why are you doing this? My father snapped. Why are you trying to catch us in a lie? We are your parents. You're acting like a prosecutor because the IRS wants $250,000 from me, I shouted. It's under control, he yelled back. Cliff is handling it. Cliff, I said. I looked back at the document on my screen. Under the section for registered agent. There was a name. Clifford Hargrove. Who is Cliff Hargrove? I asked. He's a friend. My father said, He's a business consultant. He's a genius with this stuff. He helped us set up the structure to protect our assets. He's the one talking to the IRS. He's the registered agent, I said. That means he accepts legal service. Why is a stranger listed on my company? He's not a stranger, my father said. He's helping us. And you should be grateful. Because if it wasn't for him, we would have lost the house 2 years ago. I hung up. I couldn't listen to him anymore. The mixture of aggression and victimhood was making me nauseous. I typed Cliff Hargrove Marrowick into the search bar. His Facebook profile was public. The cover photo was a picture of a lion wearing a suit, with the text, Hunt or Be Hunted, superimposed over it. His profile picture showed a man in his 50s with dyed black hair, a shiny suit, and a smile that looked like it was for sale. I scrolled through his posts. They were a stream of motivational garbage and vague financial advice. The government wants you to stay poor. Learn the secrets of the 1%. Creative financing isn't illegal. It's intelligent. Use other people's credit to build your empire. Leverage is the key. Leverage. I felt a chill go down my spine. My parents hadn't just come up with this idea on their own. They had been coached. This man, this Cliff, had taught them how to use me. Use other people's credit. That was his philosophy. And my parents, desperate and drowning, had bought it. I called Red Juniper the next morning. Mr. Henderson, I said, I found the formation documents. The signature is forged. And there is a registered agent named Cliff Hargrove. I heard him typing. Hargrove, he muttered. I've heard that name. He runs a consulting firm out of a strip mall in Marrowick. Not a CPA, not an attorney, just a consultant. He paused. Gabriella, listen to me closely. You are in a very dangerous position. If this man is involved, this isn't just about unpaid taxes. This is likely a scheme. You need to lock everything down. Today. What do I do? Freeze your credit with all 3 bureaus, he ordered. Experian, TransUnion, Equifax. Right now. Do not wait until lunch. Do it now. Then, you need to file Form 14,039 with the IRS. That is the identity theft affidavit, and you need to start gathering evidence, hard evidence, not just memories. I need travel records. I need lease agreements proving you lived in Briar Glen. I need employer records showing you were at work when these documents were signed. He took a breath. You have to build a wall of paper between you and them, he said, because if you don't, the IRS will walk right through you to get to the money. I spent the next hour doing exactly what he said. I froze my credit. I requested my personnel file from HR. I downloaded bank statements going back 3 years. I was building a defense, brick by brick, but the attack came from a direction I didn't expect. 2 days later, I was at my desk at Crestline Medical, trying to focus on a variance report, when an email popped up from Human Resources. Subject: regarding your promotion application. Please visit HR. My stomach dropped. I had applied for the senior analyst position 2 months ago. It was a significant raise, a step up in my career. I had been told I was the front runner. I walked to the HR office, my legs feeling like lead. The HR director, a woman named Karen who had always been kind to me, was sitting behind her desk. She didn't smile when I walked in. Close the door. Gabriella, she said. I sat down. We ran the standard background check for the senior role, she said, sliding a piece of paper across the desk. It's more rigorous than the entry-level screen. We look at financial responsibility because the role involves budget oversight. I looked at the paper. There was a red flag next to my name. Federal tax lien/collections activity. Gabriella, this says you are in collections for $250,000 in unpaid payroll taxes, Karen said, and that you are an officer of a company that is currently being levied by the IRS. I felt the room spin. I can explain. I stammered, it's identity theft. I didn't know about it. I'm fighting it. I believe you, Karen said, though her voice was cool. But corporate policy is strict. We cannot promote someone with an active federal tax liability to a financial oversight position. It's a compliance risk. She took the paper back. Until this is resolved, she said, we have to put your application on hold. And Gabriella, if the IRS sends a wage garnishment order to us, we have to honor it, and we will have to review your current employment status. I walked back to my desk, my ears ringing, my career. The one thing that was mine, the one thing I had built without my parents' help, the one place where I was judged solely on my own merit. They had touched it. Their chaos had leaked out of Merriwick and stained my life in Briar Glen. I couldn't just sit there. I couldn't just file forms and wait. I needed to see it. I needed to know exactly what they were doing in my name. I left work early. I got in my car and drove to Merriwick again. This time, I didn't go to my parents' house. I didn't want to hear their excuses. I didn't want to hear about how they were protecting me. I drove to the address listed on the Hearthstone Ledgerworks paperwork. It was a small storefront on Main Street, wedged between a vape shop and a vacant lot. The sign above the door was faded vinyl. Hearthstone Ledgerworks. Bookkeeping tax prep. The lights were on. I parked across the street and watched. I saw people going in and out, clients, people handing over their W-2s, trusting this business to handle their taxes, trusting me, theoretically. I walked into the convenience store next door to buy a bottle of water. I needed to calm my nerves before I went in. The woman behind the counter looked up. She was in her 60s, wearing a smock. She squinted at me. Back again. Hun? I froze. Excuse me? She smiled. You were just here yesterday, weren't you? Or maybe it was Tuesday. You girls change your hair so fast I can't keep up. My heart hammered against my ribs. I haven't been here in months, I said carefully. Get out of here, she laughed. I saw you unlocking the door at Hearthstone. You drive that silver Toyota, right? I drove a black Honda. My mother drove a silver Toyota. I realized then what was happening. It wasn't just paper. It wasn't just a signature on a PDF. My mother was going to the office. My mother was unlocking the door, and she was letting people believe she was me, or at least allowing the ambiguity to exist, to the neighbors, to the landlord, to the clients. The woman running the business was the woman on the paperwork. I walked out of the store, my legs trembling. I didn't go into Hearthstone Ledgerworks. I couldn't face it yet. The reality of the impersonation was too visceral. It was one thing to steal a social security number. It was another to wear my skin. I drove to a Motel 6 on the outskirts of town. I paid cash for a room. It smelled of bleach and stale cigarettes. I sat on the edge of the bed and opened the folder of documents I had brought with me. The police report, the IRS transcripts, the credit report, the forged signature, and now, the witness account from the convenience store clerk. I lined them up on the cheap bedspread. For the last week, I had been trying to find a way to solve this that didn't destroy my parents. I had been looking for a loophole, a misunderstanding, a way to pay the debt without sending them to jail. I had been negotiating with my own guilt. They raised me. They are family. They didn't mean to hurt me. I looked at the collection flag that had cost me my promotion. I thought about my mother practicing my signature. I thought about the mail redirected to a hidden P.O. box. They didn't mean to hurt me? No, they just didn't care if I got hurt, as long as they survived. I picked up the police report with the word unknown written on the suspect line. I took a pen from the nightstand. I crossed out unknown. In neat block letters, I wrote, David Butler and Susan Butler. I stared at the names. It felt like I was signing a death warrant for my childhood, but the childhood was already dead. They had killed it the moment they decided my future was less important than their debt. I wasn't a daughter anymore. I was a victim, and victims don't negotiate. They testify. I closed the folder. Tomorrow. I would visit the storefront. Tomorrow. I would meet the employees who thought I was their boss. Tomorrow. I would start gathering the kind of facts that put people in handcuffs. I turned off the lamp and lay in the dark, listening to the highway traffic outside. And for the first time in a week, my hands weren't shaking. They were cold, and they were steady. The morning sun in Marwick did not feel like the morning sun in Briar Glen. In Briar Glen. The light was sharp, clarifying, bouncing off glass office buildings and clean pavement. Here, the light seemed to get trapped in the humidity and the dust. Hanging heavy and yellow over the streets, I used to ride my bike down. I checked out of the Motel 6 at 8 in the morning. I was wearing the same blazer I had worn the day before, though now it felt stiff, like armor that hadn't been polished. I drank the motel coffee, which tasted like burnt plastic, and drove the 2 miles to Main Street. Hearthstone Ledgerworks was open. The storefront was even more depressing in the daylight. The window display featured a faded poster of a happy couple on a sailboat with the caption, "Financial freedom starts here." The corners curling away from the glass, the open sign was neon, buzzing with a faint, irritating hum that I could hear even through the glass door. I pushed the door open, a bell jingled, a cheerful, small-town sound that made my stomach turn. The front room was divided by a high counter covered in laminate that pretended to be mahogany. Behind it sat a young woman, maybe 22, with bright pink acrylic nails and a headset tangled in her hair. She was typing furiously on a keyboard that sounded sticky. She looked up as I walked in. Her face brightened immediately. "Hey, Gabby," she said, smiling. "I didn't know you were coming in today. Your dad said you were working remote from the city this week." I froze halfway to the counter. The air in the room felt suddenly thin. Gabby. Only my family called me Gabby. To everyone else, my colleagues, my landlord, the IRS agent on the phone, I was Gabriella. Hearing a stranger use that diminutive nickname was like having someone reach into my chest and squeeze my lungs. It implied intimacy. It implied that I was a known quantity here. I walked the rest of the way to the counter. I put my hands on the laminate to steady them. "Who are you?" I asked. My voice came out lower than I intended, stripped of the professional cadence I usually maintained. The girl's smile faltered. She blinked, looking confused. "I'm Jessica? The receptionist? I've been here since March." She looked at me more closely, her brow furrowing. "Wait," she said. "You look different today. Did you change your hair? You look tired." She thought I was the woman she saw regularly. She thought I was the woman who unlocked the door. She thought I was my mother. "I am not Gabby." I said, "I am Gabriella Butler, And I need to see the employee records. Now. Jessica pulled back, her chair rolling slightly on the plastic mat. I don't understand. Your dad said— I don't care what David said. I interrupted. I am the managing member of this LLC. That is what the paperwork says, right? That is what is on your paychecks? She nodded slowly, looking terrified. Yeah, Gabriella Butler. That's who signs the checks. Show me. I said. She hesitated, her eyes darting to the closed door behind her, the one marked private. I'm not supposed to let anyone in the system without— I reached into my bag and pulled out my driver's license. I slapped it on the counter. Look at the name, I said. Look at the photo. I am the owner of record. If you don't show me the books, I am calling the police and reporting this business for fraud right now. Jessica looked at the license. Then she looked at me. The resemblance between me and my mother was strong. We had the same jawline, the same dark eyes. But seeing us side by side, or rather, seeing the reality of me against the memory of her, the illusion broke. She typed a password into the computer. Her hands were shaking. I walked around the counter and stood behind her. Pull up the payroll summary for the last 12 months. I ordered. She clicked the mouse. A spreadsheet populated the screen. I stared at the columns, and the breath hissed out of my teeth. This wasn't a shell company. This wasn't just a paper fiction created to secure a loan. It was a real, functioning business. There were 6 employees listed: Jessica, 2 bookkeepers, a part-time cleaner, and my father. And there, in the column for federal withholding, were the numbers. Every 2 weeks, money was deducted from these people's checks. $300 here, $150 there, money for Social Security, money for Medicare, money for income tax. I looked at the column for deposits to IRS, 0, 0, 0, 0, for 14 months. Where did this money go? I asked, pointing at the screen. Jessica swallowed hard. I don't know. Mr. Butler handles the transfers. He says he puts it in the sweep account. I looked around the office. It was shabby, but it was busy. The phone rang, and Jessica ignored it. There were files stacked on the desks in the back. This business had revenue. It had cash flow. They weren't stealing because they were starving. They were stealing because they could. A door in the back opened, and an older woman walked out. She was holding a stack of folders. She stopped when she saw me standing behind the reception desk. "Oh, hello," she said. She didn't look surprised. She looked respectful. "You must be Gabriella," she said warmly. I straightened up. I'm Martha," she said. "I handle the accounts receivable. It is so nice to finally meet you in person. Your father talks about you all the time." I felt a sick curiosity rise in my throat. "What does he say?" Martha smiled, a genuine grandmotherly expression that made the betrayal feel 10 times worse. "Oh, he is so proud of you. He tells us all the time. Gabriella is the brains of the operation. He says he is just the face, but you are the one who handles the government stuff." She chuckled. "He always says, I'm just a salesman. But my daughter, she is the smart one. She understands the regulations. That is why we weren't worried when the notices started coming." David said, "Don't worry. Gabby is handling it. She knows what she is doing." I closed my eyes. It was a camouflage. A perfect, flattering camouflage. He had used my reputation, my straight-A student history, my corporate job, my stability, to explain away his own negligence. Why weren't the taxes paid? Oh, Gabriella is handling it. Why are there threatening letters? Gabriella is fixing it. He hadn't just stolen my identity. He had made me the villain of his own employees' stories. To Martha, to Jessica. I wasn't the victim. I was the incompetent boss who was jeopardizing their retirement. I opened my eyes. "Martha," I said, "I want you to listen to me very carefully. Yes, I have never seen these books before today." I said, "I do not handle the government stuff, and I did not know this business existed until last week." Martha's smile vanished. The room went dead silent. I turned to Jessica. "Print it," I said. "All of it, the payroll journals, the bank transaction histories, everything. I left the storefront with a box of documents. I didn't go back to the motel. I had an appointment with a new attorney. Red Juniper had been a good starting point for tax resolution, but I realized I needed something sharper. I needed someone who wasn't afraid to look at the criminal angle. Mara Vance ran her practice out of a converted Victorian house on the edge of the historic district. She was younger than Mr. Henderson, sharp-featured, wearing a suit that cost more than my car. She specialized in forensic accounting and fraud litigation. I sat in her conference room and laid out the documents I had taken from the office. Along with the papers I had gathered myself, Mara went through them in silence. She used a yellow highlighter, marking specific lines on the pages. The sound of the marker squeaking against the paper was the only noise in the room for 20 minutes. Finally, she capped the highlighter and looked up. "You have a problem." "Gabriella," she said. "I know." I said, "The IRS thinks I'm a thief." "No," she said. "That is the obvious problem. The hidden problem is the authorization." She slid a document across the table. It was a copy of an IRS Form 2848, Power of Attorney and Declaration of Representative. I looked at it. It was dated 18 months ago. "This form authorizes a third party to speak to the IRS on your behalf," Mara explained. "It allows them to receive confidential tax information, to negotiate payment plans, and to sign agreements." I looked at the signature at the bottom. It was the same forged loop, Gabriella Butler. "And look at the representative," Mara said. I looked at Section 2. "Hargrove Solutions, Incorporated, Cliff," I whispered. Mara nodded. "This man, Hargrove. He isn't a CPA. He isn't an enrolled agent. He is listed here as an unenrolled return preparer. But look at the date of the signature, July 5th. July 5th, I repeated. "Where were you on July 4th that year?" Mara asked. I thought back. 2 years ago, July 4th. I was here, I said slowly, in Merriwick. It was the only time I visited that summer. My mom made a big barbecue. Mara leaned back in her chair. "Exactly. You were physically present in the jurisdiction, which means if you try to claim you were in Briar Glen, they can pull cell phone tower records and prove you were in Merriwick." I felt a cold chill. "They timed it." I said, "They timed it." Mara agreed. "They waited until you were in town. Maybe they even had the paper in the house while you were eating hot dogs in the backyard. They dated it for the day after you left. Close enough to be plausible. It blurs the line. If the IRS asks, 'Did you sign anything while you were visiting your parents?' You might hesitate, and hesitation looks like guilt." She tapped the paper. "This form is dangerous, Gabriella, because of this form. Hargrove has been talking to the IRS as you for a year and a half. He has likely admitted to liability on your behalf. He has probably agreed to deadlines you didn't know about. He has been building a record of your cooperation that is actually a record of your failure." I felt sick. It was so calculated. It wasn't just my father being sloppy. It was a strategy. "What do I do?" I asked. Mara looked at me with eyes that were sympathetic but hard. "You have to revoke this immediately," she said, "and then you have to find the communication channel. If Hargrove was talking to the IRS, he was getting correspondence. Where was it going? The P.O. box?" I suggested. "Maybe," she said, "but the IRS usually requires two-factor authentication for online services now. They send confirmation codes, emails. If they set up an e-services account in your name, they need an email address and a phone number. I haven't received any emails." I said. Mara wrote something on a notepad and tore the sheet off. "Find the email," she said. "Find the account they are using to be you digitally. Because that is where the smoking gun is. That is where they drop the mask." I drove to my parents' house at 4 in the afternoon. The sky was turning a bruised purple, threatening rain. My father's truck was in the driveway. My mother's car was there too. They were both home. I didn't knock. I still had my key on my ring, a relic of a life that no longer existed. I unlocked the front door and walked in. The house was quiet. The TV was on in the living room, playing a game show, but the volume was low. "Mom? Dad?" I said. They appeared from the kitchen. My mother was wiping her hands on a towel. My father was holding a glass of iced tea. When they saw me, the atmosphere in the room shifted instantly. It went from domestic boredom to high-alert tension. "Gabriella," my mother said. Her voice was tight. "We didn't know you were still in town." I walked to the coffee table and dropped the box of documents I had taken from the office. It landed with a heavy thud. "I went to the store," I said. My father stiffened. "You had no right to go there. That is a place of business. You probably scared the girls." "I scared them?" I laughed, a harsh, jagged sound. "I scared them? Dad, Jessica thought I was Mom. Martha thinks I'm the one stealing their Social Security payments. You made me the face of your fraud." My father set his glass down hard on a coaster. "It is not fraud. It is cash flow management. It is theft," I screamed. The word ripped out of my throat, raw and burning. "You are stealing from the government and you are framing me for it." My mother stepped forward. She looked terrified, but not for me. She was looking at the windows, checking if the neighbors could hear. "Gabby, please," she hissed. "Keep your voice down." I pulled the IRS power of attorney form out of the box. I held it up. "You signed this," I said to her. "You signed my name on July 5th, the day after the barbecue. You sat at this table, probably eating leftovers, and you forged my signature to give that con artist Cliff Hargrove the power to ruin my life." My mother crumbled. She didn't deny it. She just sank onto the sofa and put her face in her hands. "We didn't have a choice," she sobbed. "Cliff said it was the only way to get the abatement. He said we needed a fresh identity to negotiate. So you sacrificed mine?" I asked. "We were going to fix it," she cried. She looked up at me, her face wet with tears. "Gabby, listen to me. We have a plan. The busy season is coming up. We are going to make a lot of money in tax prep this year. We will pay it all back." She reached out, trying to take my hand. I stepped back. "Just give us 6 months," she begged. "We will pay off the liability. We will pay you back for the credit cards. We will make it right. Just don't make this criminal. Don't go to the police again. Don't tell the IRS it was us." I stared at her. "Don't make this criminal." She wasn't asking for forgiveness. She was asking for silence. She was negotiating a plea deal with her own daughter. "And what happens if you have a bad season?" I asked quietly. "What happens if the money doesn't come in? Do I go to jail? Do I lose my job?" "You won't go to jail." My father scoffed. He was pacing by the fireplace. "They don't put people in jail for this. They just want the money. You're overreacting. Gabriella, you always do. You were always so dramatic. I am overreacting?" I stared at him, incredulous. "I lost my promotion. Dad, Crestline flagged me. My career is frozen because of you." He waved his hand. "You can get another job. You're smart. But this business is our life. It's your inheritance. My inheritance is a federal tax lien." I said, "I wasn't thinking clearly," he shouted suddenly, his face turning red. I was under pressure. "Cliff said he handled everything. He said the structure was legal. We never meant to hurt you." I looked at him. I looked at the man who had taught me to ride a bike, who had taught me to drive. "If Cliff handled everything," I said, my voice dropping to a whisper, "then why did you redirect my mail?" He stopped pacing. "If it was all legal, if it was all above board, why did you send my mail to a P.O. box I didn't know about? Why did you hide it?" He didn't answer. He couldn't answer. The mail redirection was the proof of consciousness of guilt. It proved they knew exactly what they were doing. I turned away from them. I couldn't look at them anymore. I walked over to the desk in the corner of the living room, the family computer desk. "What are you doing?" my father demanded. I sat down at the computer. I woke it up. It wasn't password protected. I opened the browser. I went to Gmail. There was an account logged in. DB_construction_1985 gmail.com. My father's old email. I clicked on the profile icon in the corner to see if there were other accounts. Dot dot dot. There was a list. Susan Butler Marowik Gmail. Com Hearthstone Admin Gmail. Com, and at the bottom, Gabriella Butler. Official Gmail, com. I felt the air leave my lungs. I clicked on it. It asked for a password. I didn't know it. I clicked, forgot password. The screen changed. Google will send a verification code to the phone number ending in 8842. I knew that number. I had dialed it 1,000 times. It was my mother's cell phone. I stood up. I pulled my own phone out of my pocket. I looked at my mother. "Give me your phone," I said. She clutched her purse to her chest. "What? No. Give me the phone. Mom!" I screamed. She flinched as if I had hit her. Trembling, she reached into her purse and pulled out her iPhone in its pink case. She handed it to me. I hit send on the computer screen. A second later, the phone in my hand buzzed. I looked at the screen. A text from Google. "Your verification code is 492001. I typed it into the computer. The inbox opened. It was a graveyard of my identity. There were emails to Northline Cooperative. Please find attached the financial statements for Gabriella Butler. There were emails to vendors. I authorized this charge. There were emails to Cliff Hargrove. I clicked on one sent to Cliff 3 months ago. Subject: IRS. Notice response. Body: Cliff. Here is the signed response for the IRS. I signed Gabby's name like you said. Let me know if we need to send more. We really need to stall the levy. Susan. I felt like I was going to vomit. They weren't just using the email to pretend to be me to the outside world. They were using it to conspire. I took a picture of the screen with my phone. Then I took a picture of the phone with the text message on it. "Gabriella, please," my mother wailed. She was crying openly now. Ugly, gasping sobs. We were drowning. We were going to lose the house. We were going to lose everything. "So you decided to lose me instead?" I asked. The front door opened. We all turned. My younger brother, Ethan, walked in. He was 29, wearing a mechanic's uniform from the local garage where he worked. He looked tired, grease under his fingernails. He stopped when he saw the scene. Me standing by the computer, shaking, Mom crying on the couch, Dad fuming by the fireplace. "What is going on?" he asked. "Your sister is trying to send us to jail," my father said bitterly. Ethan looked at me. He didn't look surprised. He looked resigned. "Gabby," he said, his voice pleading, "don't do this. You knew?" I asked him. He looked down at his boots. "I knew there was trouble with the taxes. I knew they were using your credit a little bit." "A little bit?" I laughed hysterically. "Ethan, they owe $250,000 in my name." He winced at the number. "But look, Gabby, you're stable. You have that big job at Crestline. You have savings. You can absorb this better than they can." "Dad's heart isn't good. Mom is. You know how Mom is." I stared at my brother. They had brainwashed him too. Or maybe it wasn't brainwashing. Maybe it was just the path of least resistance. So because I worked hard, I said, because I built a life, I deserve to be the sacrifice? That's the logic? He took a step toward me. "It's not about deserving," he said. "It's about family. You let it go. We work out a payment plan, and nobody has to get indicted. If you report them, you destroy the family. You know that. You're the strong one. You can handle the hit. The strong one, that was the trap. That had always been the trap. Gabriella is the smart one. Gabriella is the strong one. Gabriella is the responsible one. They had complimented me into submission for my entire life. They had built me up so I would be big enough to carry their wreckage. I looked at Ethan. I looked at my parents. I saw them clearly for the first time. They weren't a family. They were a cult of 3, built on the dogma that their comfort was worth any cost, and I was the designated offering. I picked up my bag. I put my mother's phone down on the coffee table. "I'm leaving." I said, "Gabriella," my mother cried, reaching for me. "Don't," I said. I stepped back. "Don't touch me." I walked to the door. My legs felt like they were made of wood. "You walk out that door," my father shouted. his voice booming with that old authority that used to make me freeze. "You are dead to us. Do you hear me? You are choosing money over your own blood." I stopped with my hand on the doorknob. I turned back one last time. "I'm not choosing money. Dad," I said, "I'm choosing the truth. And the truth is, you didn't raise a daughter. You raised an insurance policy." I walked out. I sat in my car in the driveway for 5 minutes, shaking so hard I couldn't put the key in the ignition. My teeth were chattering. It wasn't fear of the IRS anymore. The IRS was just a bureaucracy. Bureaucracies could be navigated with forms and lawyers. This was worse. This was the realization that my entire history with these people was a lie. Every birthday card, every "I'm proud of you," every holiday dinner, it was all just maintenance. They were maintaining the asset. They were keeping me primed, keeping me close, keeping me responsible, so that when the day came that they needed to burn someone to stay warm, I would be right there, ready for the match. I started the car. I backed out of the driveway. I didn't look at the house as I drove away. I drove toward the highway, toward Briar Glen, toward the only life I had left. And as I drove, I saw the notification on my phone screen, an email from Mara Vance. Subject: Affidavit Draft. Body: Gabriella. Are you ready to submit? Once we file this, there is no turning back. I gripped the steering wheel. I wasn't turning back. There was nowhere to turn back to. The days following my departure from Marowak did not feel like freedom. They felt like waiting for a detonation. I had returned to Briar Glen, but the sanctuary of my apartment had been breached. The silence was no longer peaceful. It was heavy, filled with the anticipation of the next certified letter. It arrived on a Thursday. I knew the sound of the mail carrier's truck now. I knew the specific gear shift as it slowed down in front of my building. I walked down to the lobby, my key sweating in my hand. The envelope was there, another one. I took it upstairs and opened it with a letter opener, slicing the paper with surgical precision. I was done tearing things open in a panic. I was in survival mode now. Notice CP 504. Notice of intent to levy. The language was explicit. The Internal Revenue Service was done asking. They were informing. They intended to seize my state tax refund. They intended to search for assets. They warned that they could contact third parties, employers, banks, neighbors, to determine my ability to pay. I sat at my kitchen table and read the paragraph about levy on wages. They could take a significant portion of my paycheck before it even hit my direct deposit. I called Red Juniper Tax Counsel immediately. "Mr. Henderson," I said when he picked up, "I got a CP 504. I expected him to sound alarmed, but his voice was calm, the voice of a man who navigated disasters for a living. "Okay, Gabriella," he said, "this is the escalation. We expected this. It means the automated system is moving forward because the debt is still coded as valid in their computer. How do we stop it?" I asked. I felt like I was sprinting on ice, moving my legs as fast as I could but staying in exactly the same terrified place. "We request a collection due process hearing." He said, "We file Form 12,153. This formally pauses the levy action while your case is reviewed. It buys us time. It forces a human being to look at the file before the computer starts draining your accounts." "Buys us time?" I asked. "How much time?" "Months, usually," he said. "But Gabriella, we need to use that time to substantiate the identity theft claim. We need to prove that you did not control the funds. We need to prove the fraud. I have the police report." I said, "I have the affidavit. We need more." He said, "We need the money trail." The money trail arrived 3 days later, courtesy of a subpoena Mara Vance had issued to the bank used by Hearthstone Ledger Works. I sat in Mara's conference room again. The table was covered in stacks of paper. 12 months of bank statements from Northline Cooperative. "This is the autopsy," Mara said, sliding a highlighter across the mahogany table. "Let's see what killed the patient." I opened the first statement. It was dated January of the previous year. The account name was Hearthstone Ledger Works, LLC, but underneath it, in smaller print, was the account type, Platinum Business Advantage. That requires a credit score of 750 or higher to open. Mara noted dryly. Your father's bankruptcy would have disqualified him instantly. This account exists only because your credit history acted as the key. I looked at the transactions. I expected to see desperation. My parents had told me they did this to keep the family afloat. I expected to see payments for the mortgage, for the electric bill, for the bare necessities of keeping a failing business alive. Instead, I saw a lifestyle. January 12th. The Ironwood Steakhouse. $240. January 15th. Pro Shop at Merriwick Golf Links. $180. February 4th. Lux Lease Automotive. $650. I ran my finger down the page. The car lease payment was recurring. My dad drives a 10-year-old truck, I said. Confused, Mara looked at the statement. That payment is for a luxury sedan. Who drives a new car in your family? I thought about it. No one. My mom drove a Toyota. My dad drove the Ford. Then I remembered Cliff Hargrove's Facebook photo. The shiny suit, the car in the background of his motivational videos. I felt a surge of bile. Look at the transfers. Mara said, I turned the page. Outgoing wire. Hargrove Solutions, $1,500. Outgoing wire. Hargrove Solutions, $1,500. It was every month. A recurring consulting fee. I looked at the dates. In March, the balance in the account had been $4,000. The payroll taxes due for that month were roughly $3,000. They had the money. They had $4,000 in the bank. They could have paid the IRS. They could have funded the Social Security accounts of their employees. Instead, on March 15th, there was a transfer of $1,500 to Hargrove Solutions and a withdrawal of $500 cash. The tax payment was skipped. They paid Cliff instead of the government. I whispered. Mara nodded grimly. They paid the man who taught them how to commit the fraud, using the money they should have used to prevent the liability. It wasn't survival. It was arrogance. They weren't stealing to eat. They were stealing to maintain the appearance of being successful business owners. They used my name to qualify for a low-interest credit line, used that credit to pay for dinners and consulting, and when the tax bill came due. They let it rot because they thought they could negotiate it away later. I felt a new kind of anger then. It wasn't the hot, reactive anger of the confrontation in the living room. It was cold. It was the anger of a forensic accountant finding the missing digit. It's a lie, I said. The whole, we did it for the family speech. It's a lie. They did it for their ego, and for him. Mara said, tapping the name Hargrove Solutions. He was draining them dry while telling them everything was fine. But Gabriella, look at this. She pointed to a check image on the last page. It was a check written to cash. The signature line had that familiar, looped forgery of my name. But the memo line didn't say petty cash or supplies. It said, Ethan Loan. I stared at the name. My brother. My brother who had stood in the living room and told me to let it go. My brother who had said, you can handle the hit. The check was for $2,000. He took money, too. I said, my voice sounded hollow. He didn't just know about it. Mara said, he benefited from it. This makes him a potential target for the IRS, too. If they trace the funds, they will see this. He knew. I said, he knew the whole time. That's why he wanted me to drop it, not to protect Mom and Dad. To protect himself. I closed the folder. The betrayal wasn't a crack in the foundation. The foundation didn't exist. I was standing on a sinkhole. The following week, I received a summons for a verification interview with the IRS. It wasn't an audit. It was a specific inquiry related to my identity theft affidavit. I had to go to the federal building in downtown Cincinnati. The building was a fortress of concrete and glass. Security was tight. I had to take off my shoes and put my bag through an X-ray machine. It felt like entering a prison or a hospital where people went to die. I met Agent Miller in a small, windowless conference room. She was not the voice on the phone. She was a woman in her 40s, wearing a navy blue suit that looked like it repelled lint and sympathy in equal measure. She had a laptop and a thick file folder. "Ms. Butler," she said. She didn't offer a handshake. "Please sit." I sat. My hands were folded in my lap. I was trying to look like the honest taxpayer I was. Agent Miller opened the file. She got straight to the point. "You have submitted a Form 14,039 claiming you are a victim of identity theft regarding the entity Hearthstone Ledger Works." She said, "You claim you did not sign the formation documents, the SS4, or the bank resolutions. That is correct." I said, "However," she continued, her eyes fixing on mine, "you are the daughter of the individuals operating the business. You visited the town of Marwick frequently during the period of operation. I visited for holidays." I said, 3 or 4 times a year." "Did you ever perform work for the business?" she asked. "Did you ever answer the phone? Did you ever file a paper? Did you ever run an errand?" "No." I said, "Did you ever receive money from your parents during this time?" She asked, "Birthday gifts? Christmas checks? Assistance with rent?" I hesitated. Agent Miller's eyes narrowed. "They gave me a check for $500 for Christmas last year." I said, "And my dad paid for a tire repair on my car when I visited in July." She typed something into her laptop. The sound of the keys was like gunshots. "So you received a financial benefit from the individuals operating the business," she said. "It was a Christmas gift." I protested. "It wasn't a distribution of profits. Money is fungible." "Ms. Butler," she said flatly, "if the business was not paying its tax liability, and the owners were using business funds to give you cash gifts or repair your vehicle, the IRS could view that as you benefiting from the unpaid taxes." I felt the trap snapping shut. I didn't know where the money came from. I said, "I thought it was from their savings." "Ignorance is not the same as innocence in trust fund recovery cases," she said. She leaned forward. "I need to ask you a very specific question, and I need you to think very carefully before you answer." I held my breath. "Did you ever, at any point, agree, verbally or in writing, to let your parents use your credit information to assist them, even if you didn't know the extent? Even if you thought it was for something else?" I thought about the pressure. I thought about the guilt trips. I thought about the way my mother looked when she cried. But I looked at Agent Miller, and I realized that if I gave an inch, if I admitted to even a shred of ambiguity, she would hang the entire debt around my neck. "No," I said clearly, "I never agreed. They used my information without my consent." She stared at me for a long 5 seconds. She was assessing my credibility. She was looking for the twitch, the blink, the sign of the lying daughter trying to save her own skin. Finally, she nodded. "We will continue the investigation," she said. "We will be interviewing the other parties involved." The other parties. My parents. I walked out of the federal building feeling like I had just survived a car crash. I was alive, but I was bruised, and I knew the other driver hadn't been interviewed yet. I returned to work at Crestline Medical Systems the next day, hoping for normalcy. I needed spreadsheets. I needed meetings about supply chain logistics. I needed boring problems. I didn't get them. My ID badge still worked, but the atmosphere had shifted. When I walked into the break room to get coffee, 2 of my coworkers were talking in hushed tones. They stopped abruptly when I entered. "Hey, Gabriella," one of them said. His voice was too bright. "Hey, Mark," I said. There was an awkward silence. "So, heard about the promotion hold," he said. "That sucks." News traveled fast. HR was supposed to be confidential, but in a corporate office, silence was a megaphone. "Yeah," I said, pouring my coffee. "Just some administrative stuff to clear up. Identity theft issues. Right, he said. He didn't ask for details. He didn't offer sympathy. He just wanted to end the conversation. Identity theft sounds scary. Hope you get it sorted." He walked out. I went to my desk. I had an email from Karen in HR. Subject: Update on senior analyst position. I opened it. "Dear Gabriella, regarding your application for the senior analyst role, we have decided to move forward with another candidate, given the unresolved nature of the compliance flag on your background check. We cannot keep the position open indefinitely. We encourage you to apply for future openings once the matter is fully resolved." I stared at the screen. They had given the job to someone else. I had worked for that promotion for 3 years. I had stayed late. I had fixed other people's mistakes. I had been the responsible one at Crestline, just like I was the responsible one in my family, and it was gone. My parents hadn't just stolen my credit score, they had stolen my future earnings. They had reached into my office in Briar Glen and swept my career off the desk. I closed my email. I didn't cry. I was past crying. I felt a cold, hard clarity settling in my chest. I needed to sever the last tie. I knew my parents' schedule. On Wednesdays, they went to a couples counseling session at the church at 4 o'clock. A performance of piety they maintained for the community. And Ethan would be at the garage until 6. The house would be empty. I drove to Marrowick. I wasn't going to confront them. I wasn't going to argue. I was going on a retrieval mission. I still had my key. I hadn't returned it. I pulled into the driveway at 4:15. I let myself in. The house smelled the same. That suffocating mix of potpourri and denial. I went straight to my old bedroom. I packed the few remaining things I had left there. Some books, a winter coat, a box of high school yearbooks. I stripped the room. I wanted nothing of mine left in this house that they could use as leverage. "Come get your things, Gabby. We just want to talk." No, I was taking the bait off the hook. Then I went to the garage. My father was a hoarder of paperwork. He kept boxes of old tax returns, ironic, manuals for appliances they no longer owned, and family records. I found the plastic bin marked Family Docs on the second shelf. I popped the lid. I flipped through the hanging folders, medical records, school transcripts. I found the folder marked Gabriella. I pulled it out. Inside was my original birth certificate, the one with the raised seal, and my original Social Security card. I stared at them. When I moved to Briar Glen 5 years ago, I had asked my mother where these were. I needed them for my new job. She had told me they were lost in the move. She said, "Oh, honey, I think they got thrown out by mistake. You'll have to order replacements." I had ordered replacements. It had been a hassle, but they weren't lost. She had kept them. She had lied to me. Why? "For safekeeping," she would say. But as I held the card with the number that was currently attached to a $250,000 debt, I understood. It wasn't safekeeping, it was access. As long as she had the originals, she felt she had ownership. She had the keys to the kingdom. If she needed to apply for something, if she needed to prove I existed, she didn't need to ask me. She had the source code in a plastic bin in the garage. I took the documents. I took the whole folder. I didn't leave a note. As I was walking out to my car, my phone buzzed. It was a voicemail notification. I got in the car, locked the doors, and played the message. It was my father. "Gabriella, it's Dad. Look, we need to stop this fighting. It's killing your mother. We have a proposal. We want to give you the cabin lot. You know, the one up near the lake? It's appraised at $40,000. We'll sign the deed over to you. You can sell it. Keep the money. Use it to pay off the credit cards. Whatever. Just come home. Let's sign the papers and stop the lawyers." I looked at the phone. The cabin lot. I remembered that lot. They had bought it 10 years ago, planning to build a retirement home. They never did. It was just a patch of woods. It sounded generous. $40,000. A peace offering. But I had spent the last 2 weeks learning to think like a forensic accountant. I had spent my nights reading tax codes and lien laws. I didn't drive home. I drove to the county recorder's office in the next town over. It was closed, but they had an online portal that I could access from my phone. I searched the parcel number for the cabin lot. The results loaded on my small screen. Owner: David and Susan Butler. Encumbrances: 1. Mortgage lien, Northline Cooperative. Balance: $32,000. 2. State tax lien, Ohio Department of Taxation. Balance: $8,500. 3. Mechanics lien, Miller Excavating. Balance: $4,000. The property was underwater. It wasn't an asset. It was a bundle of debts wrapped in a deed. If I accepted it, if I let them transfer it to me, I wouldn't be getting $40,000. I would be inheriting their liens. I would be taking on another legal headache. And worse, the transfer itself could be seen by the IRS as a fraudulent conveyance, an attempt to move assets out of their name to avoid the levy. If I took it, I would be helping them hide property from the government. I would become an accomplice. They weren't offering me a branch. They were handing me a grenade and asking me to pull the pin. I sat in my car in the parking lot of the county building, the blue light of the phone illuminating my face. I opened the voice recorder app on my phone. I started a new recording. Date: November 2nd. Time: 6:30 p.m. I just retrieved my original birth certificate and social security card from my parents' garage. They were not lost. As previously stated by Susan Butler, I also received a voicemail from David Butler offering to transfer the cabin lot to me to resolve the dispute. Public records show the lot is fully encumbered by liens totaling more than its value. This offer appears to be an attempt to offload liability or hide assets. I stopped the recording. I wasn't building a memoir. I was building a case file. I drove back to Briar Glen in silence. I felt lighter, in a terrifying way. The last thread of doubt was gone. There was no misunderstanding. There was no, "we didn't mean to." There was only the predator and the prey. And I was done being the prey. When I got home, I opened my laptop. I drafted an email to Mara Vance. Subject: Additional evidence, Mara. Attached is a photo of the lost documents I recovered. Also, my brother received a $2,000 check from the business labeled Ethan Loan. My parents just offered to transfer encumbered real estate to me. I believe this constitutes an attempt to involve me in further fraudulent conveyance. Please add this to the file for the IRS. I hit send. Then I went to my closet. I pushed my clothes aside and pulled out a shoebox. I put my birth certificate and my social security card inside. I taped the box shut. I wrote, "Do not touch" on the top in black marker. It was a small victory, reclaiming my own name. But as I looked at the box, I knew the war was just starting. The IRS was still coming. My career was still dead, and the people who had done this were still sleeping in the house where I grew up, convincing themselves they were the victims. I lay down on my bed, staring at the ceiling. "You can handle the hit," Ethan had said. I squeezed my eyes shut. "Watch me." I thought, "Watch me hit back." I sat in Mara Vance's office, the leather chair feeling cold against my back through my thin blouse. Outside, the November rain was stripping the last of the autumn leaves from the trees in Briar Glen, pasting them against the pavement like wet paper. Inside, Mara was stripping away the last of my illusions. She had the property report for the cabin lot on her desk, the one my father had offered me in a voicemail that sounded so benevolent, so weary of fighting. "We want to give you the cabin lot. It's appraised at $40,000. Mara tapped the document with a manicured fingernail. "It is a classic poison pill," she said. Her voice was devoid of surprise. She had seen too much human wreckage to be shocked by family betrayal. "The property is appraised at $40,000. Yes, but the encumbrances total $44,500. I stared at the numbers. Northline Cooperative holds a first mortgage. She read, "The Ohio Department of Taxation has a lien for unpaid state income taxes, and there is a mechanics lien from a local excavation company that dates back 3 years. She looked up at me. "If you had accepted the deed, Gabriella, you would not have received an asset. You would have assumed the title to a piece of land that is legally underwater. And because the transfer would have happened while your parents are under federal scrutiny, the IRS could have viewed it as a fraudulent conveyance. You would have been helping them hide an asset while simultaneously taking on their debt." I felt a dry, hollow laugh bubbling up in my chest. It wasn't funny, but the absurdity was overwhelming. "They tried to bribe me with debt," I said. "They tried to buy my silence with a hole in the ground that they don't even own anymore." "It is worse than a bribe," Mara said. "It is a trap. If you had signed that deed, you would have become a party to their financial entanglement. It would have muddied the waters of your innocent spouse claim. They weren't just trying to pay you off. They were trying to pull you back into the mud with them. I closed my eyes. I could hear my father's voice in the voicemail. Just come home. Let's sign the papers. He knew. He had to know. You don't forget that you owe the state $8,000 on a piece of land. They are desperate, Mara said, and desperate people do not have loyalties. They only have survival instincts. I left her office and drove to the library. I didn't want to go home. My apartment felt like a waiting room for the next disaster. The library was neutral ground. It smelled of old paper and dust. Not betrayal. I sat in a carrel in the back corner and opened my laptop. I wasn't looking for tax codes today. I was looking for Cliff Hargrove. My father had called him a genius. My mother had called him a savior. But looking at the bank statements, I knew he was a parasite, and parasites usually don't have just one host. I started searching for his business name, Hargrove Solutions, combined with keywords like tax debt, IRS, and scam. The first few pages were his own digital pollution, the fake motivational quotes, the YouTube videos where he ranted about the Federal Reserve in a cheap suit. But then I went to the local business forums. I found a thread on a site called Small Biz Talk, dated 8 months ago. The user handle was Hardware Hank. The location was listed as Oak Haven, a town 40 minutes south of Merriwick. Topic: Sudden tax liens and officer liability. I clicked on it. Has anyone dealt with a consultant who sets up a holding company structure for payroll? The post read, I hired a guy to help with cash flow. He set up a new LLC, said he'd handle the back end. Now I'm getting letters from the IRS saying I owe $150,000 in payroll taxes for a company I thought was just a shell. The consultant is gone. But my name is on everything. He even listed my daughter as the secretary without telling me. My breath hitched. I created an account. I typed a reply. Was the consultant's name Cliff? I waited. I hit refresh. 10 minutes later, a notification. Yes, C. Hargrove. Do you know him? I stared at the screen. It wasn't just my parents. It was a playbook. Cliff Hargrove moved from dying town to dying town, finding desperate small business owners, hardware stores, dry cleaners, tax preparers, and selling them a magic bullet for their debt. He taught them to create a fresh entity, use a family member's clean credit to act as the officer, and then burn the entity down while he collected consulting fees. He was the architect. My parents were just the contractors, but that didn't absolve them. Hardware Hank said his daughter was listed as secretary. He didn't say he hid the mail from her. He didn't say he forged her signature on a power of attorney. He was asking for help on a forum. My parents had built a fortress of lies to keep me in the dark. I printed the forum thread. It was hearsay, but it was a pattern. It proved that Hearthstone Ledgerworks wasn't a family tragedy. It was a crime scene. The following week, the IRS escalation moved from a terrifying threat to a terrifying reality. I received a letter informing me that my case had been assigned to a specialized reviewer in the Identity Theft Victim Assistance Unit. This was good news. Theoretically, it meant a human being was looking at it, but the letter came with a demand for documentation that felt impossible. Please provide clear and convincing evidence that you did not exercise control over the business entity during the tax periods in question. How do you prove a negative? How do you prove you didn't do something? I spent 3 nights on my living room floor, surrounded by 3 years of my life in paper form. I pulled my lease agreement for the apartment in Briar Glen. I highlighted the clause that required me to occupy the unit as my primary residence. I requested my badge access logs from Crestline Security. It was a humiliating request to make. I had to explain to the security chief that I needed to prove I was at work to the IRS. But I got them. October 12th. Badge. In 7:55 a.m., badge out. 5:30 p.m. I cross-referenced these dates with the dates the fraudulent checks were signed in Merriwick. Check 1045 signed Gabriella Butler on October 12th. I couldn't be in 2 places at once. I laid the badge log next to the copy of the check Mara had obtained. It was physical proof. Unless I had learned to teleport, the signature was a forgery. I pulled my credit card statements. I highlighted every transaction made in Briar Glen: gas stations, grocery stores, coffee shops. I built a map of my life, a constellation of small, mundane purchases that proved I existed here, not there. I compiled it all into a 3-inch binder. I labeled it Evidence of Non-Involvement. It felt pathetic. This was my life, my boring, responsible, steady life. And I had to package it up to prove I wasn't a criminal mastermind running a tax evasion scheme out of a dusty storefront 3 hours away. I mailed the binder on a Friday. On Saturday morning, my phone rang. It was my mother. I hadn't spoken to her since I walked out of the house. I had blocked her number, then unblocked it, terrified that if I blocked them completely, I would miss a warning of the next attack. I stared at the monitor. Mom. I picked up. I didn't say hello. I hit the record button on my other phone, the old iPhone I kept for this exact purpose, and set it on the table. "What do you want?" I asked. Her voice was ragged. She sounded like she hadn't slept in a week. "They called us." She whispered. "Who?" "The IRS," she said. "An investigator. He came to the shop. Gabby. He walked right in. He flashed a badge. He started asking Jessica questions. He asked for the computer hard drive. I felt a cold spike of adrenaline. The machine was moving. "I told you." I said. "I told you this would happen. Why couldn't you just wait?" She sobbed. The sound was guttural, raw. We were so close. We had a plan. We were going to pay it down this quarter. There is no plan. "Mom!" I shouted, my control snapping. There was never a plan. You were paying Cliff Hargrove $1,500 a month while you owed the government $250,000. You weren't paying it down. You were paying for the privilege of pretending you weren't broke. It was supposed to be temporary, she screamed back. The confession hung in the air. It was supposed to be temporary, she repeated, her voice dropping to a frantic whisper. When we started, when Cliff set it up, we just needed a bridge, just a few months. Your credit was so good. Gabby, you were so perfect. We thought, we'll use her name, get the line of credit, pay the vendors, and then switch it back before she ever knows. And the taxes? I asked. We meant to pay them, she said. But then the roof at the shop leaked. And then the car broke down. And then Cliff said we needed to pay his retainer, or he couldn't protect us. It just snowballed. You stole my identity for a temporary fix, I said, my voice trembling. And then you let it run for 2 years. You let it ruin me. We didn't want to ruin you, she cried. We love you. We were protecting you from the worry. You weren't protecting me, I said. You were protecting yourselves from the shame of admitting you failed. You would rather make me a criminal than admit you're bankrupt. Give me the phone. Susan. It was my father's voice. Hard, brittle. I heard a scuffle, and then his breathing was on the line. You happy now? He asked. You happy that you sent federal agents to your mother's workplace? She's a wreck. She can't stop shaking. She committed a felony. Dad, I said, and so did you. We didn't have a choice, he said. There is always a choice. I said, no, there isn't, he shouted. You don't know what it was like. You sit in your fancy apartment with your salary and your benefits. You don't know what it's like to have someone like Cliff Hargrove holding a gun to your head. I froze. What? He threatened us. Gabriella. My father said. His voice dropped, sounding suddenly old and defeated. About 6 months in. I wanted to stop. I told him, this is too risky. We need to take Gabby's name off. And he laughed. He told me that if I tried to dissolve the LLC or change the officer, he would report us for bank fraud. He said, you already signed her name to the bank documents. If you back out now, I'll tell the bank you committed forgery. My stomach turned. So you kept doing it? I asked. He had us. My father said, if we stopped, we went to jail. If we kept going, maybe we could earn our way out. He said as long as we kept paying him, he would keep the IRS confused. He said he was buying us time. I closed my eyes. I saw the trap perfectly now. Cliff had baited them with the easy credit, waited until they committed the first crime, the first forgery, and then used that crime to blackmail them into continuing the scheme. He was bleeding them dry, using their fear of exposure to keep the checks coming. But then I realized the other side of it. So you chose me, I said quietly. What? Cliff said he would report you if you stopped. I said, so to save yourselves from being reported, you decided to keep using me as the shield. You decided that my risk was acceptable collateral damage to keep yourselves out of jail. It wasn't like that, he said weakly. It was exactly like that. I said, you were scared of Cliff, so you threw me to him. I hung up. I sat there, staring at the phone. The recording was saved. I had the confession. It was supposed to be temporary. He threatened us. It proved they were victims of extortion. Yes. But it also proved that when faced with the choice between their own safety and my destruction, they had chosen themselves every single day for 2 years. 2 days later, my doorbell rang. I looked through the peephole. It was Ethan. I debated not opening it, but he was my brother. And part of me, the part that was still the big sister who used to help him with his homework, wanted to believe he was different. I opened the door. He looked terrible. His eyes were red-rimmed. He was wearing his work jacket, stained with grease. "Can I come in?" he asked. I stepped back. He walked into my living room and looked around. It was clean, sparse, organized, the opposite of the chaos in Merriwick. "They're talking about suicide." "Gabby," he said. He didn't say hello. He just dropped the bomb. I stood by the kitchen island, keeping distance between us. "Mom is saying she can't go to prison," he said. "Dad is sitting in his chair staring at the wall. The shop is closed." The agent seized the computers. "It's over." I didn't say anything. "You did this," he said. He looked at me, and there was hate in his eyes. Pure, unadulterated hate. You couldn't just help them. You couldn't just take the hit and work it out. You had to go nuclear. "I helped them?" I asked, my voice incredulous. "Ethan, I didn't do this. They did this. Cliff did this. You pulled the trigger," he shouted. "You sent the cops. You sent the feds. You destroyed the family." I looked at him. I looked at the brother I had protected on the playground. The brother I had bought Christmas presents for when our parents were short on cash. And I realized he was just like them. He needed a villain. And it couldn't be Mom and Dad, because that would mean his entire world was built on quicksand. So it had to be me. I had to be the villain for refusing to be the victim. The family wasn't destroyed this week. "Ethan," I said. My voice was calm, terrifyingly calm. He stopped, chest heaving. "The family was destroyed the day you all decided I would be the shield." I said. He flinched. "You knew." I said. "You took that $2,000 loan. You watched them intercept my mail. You watched them sign my name. And you said nothing, because as long as it was my name on the line, it wasn't yours. You weren't protecting the family. You were protecting your own comfort." "That's not true," he spat. "It is true," I said. "And now that the bill has come due, you're mad because I'm not paying it for you." "Get out," I said. He stared at me. "You're cold. Gabby, you're ice cold." "I'm not cold," I said. "I'm just done burning myself to keep you warm." He left. He slammed the door so hard the frame shook. I locked the deadbolt. Then I slid the chain lock into place. The following Monday, I met with Mara Vance and Mr. Henderson. We were doing a joint conference call with the IRS specialized reviewer. The speakerphone sat in the middle of the table like a monolith. "Ms. Butler." The reviewer's voice came through, tinny and precise. "We have reviewed the documentation you submitted, the badge logs, the lease agreements, the affidavit regarding the forged signatures." I held my breath. "The evidence is compelling." The reviewer said, "It appears highly unlikely that you were the operator of the business in Merriwick while maintaining full-time employment in Briar Glen. The signature variance on the formation documents is also noted." I felt a rush of air enter my lungs. Relief, sweet, dizzying relief. However, the reviewer continued, "The word hung there, because this involves trust fund taxes, and because the perpetrators are immediate family members. We cannot simply administratively remove the liability without a definitive determination of fraud. What does that mean? Mara asked sharply. It means, the reviewer said, that for Ms. Butler to be fully absolved, the service needs to pursue the actual responsible parties. We are prepared to close the collection action against Ms. Butler, provided she fully cooperates with the Criminal Investigation Division. My heart stopped. We need a sworn statement detailing her knowledge of her parents' activities, the reviewer said. We need the evidence regarding the consultant, Mr. Hargrove, and we need her to testify if this goes to a grand jury. I looked at Mara. She looked back at me, her face grave. This is the deal, Gabriella, Mara whispered, covering the microphone. They will let you go, but you have to hand them your parents, not just as a tip, as a witness. I looked at the speakerphone. If I say yes, I am sending my mother and father to prison. I am testifying against them in court. If I say no, the liability stays on me. The $250,000, the ruined credit, the seized wages, I understand. I said to the reviewer. My voice sounded like it belonged to someone else. How long do I have to decide? We need your final affidavit by Friday, the reviewer said. We hung up. Mr. Henderson took off his glasses and rubbed the bridge of his nose. It is a win, Gabriella, he said softly. It is the best outcome we could hope for legally. You get your life back. Do I? I asked. He paused. You get your financial life back, he corrected. But I have to be honest with you. Even if the IRS clears you, the record of this, the background checks, it takes years to scrub. The credit bureaus are slow. The compliance flag at your job might not vanish overnight. And the personal toll. He didn't finish. I walked out of the office. The rain had stopped, but the sky was a bruised purple. I drove home. I sat on my couch. I had the password to the fake email account now. I hadn't looked at it since the day in my parents' living room. I had been too afraid of what else I would find. But now, I needed to know. I needed to hate them enough to sign that paper on Friday. I logged in. Gabriella. Butler. Official Gmail.com. I went to the drafts folder. There were 12 drafts. I clicked on one dated 6 months ago. Subject. Thank you, Cliff. Body. Dear Cliff, I just wanted to write and say how much I appreciate you helping my parents and me with the business structure. I know the taxes are complicated, but I fully trust your guidance. As the managing member, I approve the new fee schedule. It was written in my voice. It used my cadence. I just wanted to write. I clicked on another one. Subject. Note to file. Body, I, Gabriella Butler. Acknowledge that I'm aware of the payroll tax delays and accept full responsibility as we restructure. My blood ran cold. They hadn't just used my name. They had been planting evidence. They had been writing confessions in my voice, saving them as drafts, just in case. She looked like a mother who loved her daughter. I held that phone in my left hand. In my right hand, I held my other phone, the work phone. There was a text message from Mara Vance. Gabriella, the affidavit is ready for your signature. Are you ready to submit? I sat there in the quiet of my apartment. The two phones felt heavy, like stones in my palms. If I answered the left hand, I stepped back into the fog. I accepted the guilt. I saved them, and I drowned. If I answered the right hand, I cut the cord. I became the orphan, but I became free. I looked at the picture of my mother one last time. I remembered the drafts. I remembered the temporary fix that lasted 2 years. I remembered the Ethan loan. I let the left hand drop to the couch. The phone continued to buzz, muffled against the fabric, until it finally went silent. I raised the right hand. I typed 2 words. I'm ready. I hit send. I sat at the mahogany conference table in Mara Vance's office, watching her slide the thick envelope across the polished surface. It was a standard FedEx package, cardboard and stiff, but it felt like it contained radioactive material. Inside was the final affidavit. It was a 3-inch stack of paper that documented the systematic destruction of my relationship with my parents. There were the timelines showing I was in Briar Glen while my signature was being forged in Merriwick. There were the sworn statements from my employer. There were the photos of the lost identity documents I had recovered from the garage. And on top, printed in high resolution, were the screenshots of the fake email drafts where my mother had tried to script my gratitude for a crime I didn't know was happening. I felt sick. Most people imagine that standing up for yourself feels like triumph. They think it feels like the swell of music in a movie when the hero finally draws the sword. It does not. It feels like surgery without anesthesia. I wasn't winning. I was amputating a limb to stop an infection from killing me. Mara looked at me. Her pen hovered over the shipping label. "Once this leaves the room, Gabriella," she said, her voice quiet, "there is no calling it back. This officially designates David and Susan Butler as the suspects in a federal identity theft investigation." I looked at the package. "Send it," I said. 2 days later, the IRS scheduled a conference call. It was the final review before the case was moved to the determination phase. I sat in my apartment, my phone on speaker, with Mara and Mr. Henderson dialed in from their offices, the voice of the specialized reviewer. Mr. Vance, no relation to Mara, was crisp and bureaucratic. "Miss Butler," he said, "we have received your submission. The evidence regarding the forged signatures and the unauthorized representative is substantial. However, we have one final piece of technical data to review with you." My heart hammered against my ribs. Had they found something I missed? Had I accidentally signed a check 5 years ago that incriminated me? We ran a digital trace on the electronic filing history for Hearthstone LedgerWorks. The agent said, specifically, the IP addresses used to submit the quarterly 941 forms and the initial online application for the employer identification number. I waited. The filings were not made from a commercial internet service provider associated with Mr. Hargrove's office, he said. They were made from a residential IP address registered to a Spectrum account at 14 Maple Street, Merriwick, Ohio. I closed my eyes. "That is my parents' house," I whispered. "Correct," the agent said. "This contradicts the narrative that the consultant, Mr. Hargrove, was acting entirely alone or without the knowledge of the residents. The crimes were being committed from the home computer. It was the final nail. My father had claimed Cliff handled everything. He claimed they were just ignorant victims who trusted the wrong expert, but they had sat at their own desk, used their own Wi-Fi, and clicked submit on the forms that lied about my involvement." "Thank you, Agent," Mara said. "We believe this supports Ms. Butler's claim that she was not the one pressing the button, as she resides in Briar Glen." "It does," the agent agreed, "but it also implicates the residents of that household in wire fraud." We hung up. The silence in my apartment was deafening. That night, my phone rang. It was late, past 11 o'clock. I looked at the screen. Mom. I had unblocked them. I told myself it was for evidence gathering. But deep down, maybe I wanted them to admit it. Maybe I wanted them to say, "We are sorry. We will fix this." I picked up. I hit record on the backup device. "Hello?" I said. "Gabriella?" Her voice was a ghost of itself. Thin, trembling, terrified. "I'm here," I said. "We know you're talking to them," she whispered. "Cliff called us. He said the IRS contacted him for a deposition. He's flipping. Gabby, he's going to say we did it all. He's telling the truth about that part." "Mom," I said, "you filed the forms from the house. They have the IP address." She gasped, a sharp, jagged intake of breath. "They know? They know everything." I said. There was a long silence. Then, she spoke, and her voice dropped even lower, into a register of desperation I had never heard before. "Gabby, listen to me. Please, you can fix this. I can't fix this. Mom, it's done." "No," she said, rushing the words. "You can. You can just say you might have signed it and forgot. Say you gave us verbal permission and it just slipped your mind. If you say that, it becomes a civil dispute. It's just money. We can declare bankruptcy. But if you say you didn't know, it's fraud. It's prison. I stared at the wall. You want me to lie to the federal government? I asked. Just a little confusion. She begged, just say, I'm not sure. That's all. I'm not sure. If I say that, I said, my voice hardening, the IRS will hold me personally liable for $247,000. They will garnish my wages for the next 10 years. I will never work in finance again. I will lose my credibility forever. But you're young, she cried. You can rebuild. We're old. Gabby, your father's heart. He can't survive prison. Please, don't kill him. I hung up. I sat there, shaking. They weren't calling to apologize. They were calling to negotiate the terms of my destruction. They wanted me to burn my future to keep them warm for a few more years. They wanted me to look a federal agent in the eye and perjure myself so they wouldn't have to face the consequences of their own greed. I stood up. I grabbed my keys. I wasn't going to sleep tonight. I drove to Marwick in the dark. The road was empty, a ribbon of asphalt stretching into the past. I arrived at the house at 2 a.m. The lights were on. They were up. Panic does not sleep. I walked to the front door. I didn't use my key. I pounded on the wood. The door opened. My father stood there. He looked 20 years older than he had a month ago. His skin was gray, his eyes sunken. Gabriella? He said. You came. He sounded hopeful. He thought I was there to agree to the lie. He thought I was there to surrender. I walked past him into the living room. My mother was sitting on the couch, surrounded by tissues. She looked up, her face swollen. You came to help us? She asked. I stood in the center of the room. The house smelled of stale coffee and fear. I didn't come to help you. I said. Their faces fell. I came to tell you that I submitted the affidavit. I said. I gave them everything. The emails, the stolen mail, the check to Ethan, the IP address logs. My mother let out a wail that sounded like an animal in a trap. You turned us in? My father whispered. His voice was full of disbelief. Your own flesh and blood? I looked at him. I felt a cold clarity that was sharper than anger. You don't want me to be safe, Dad, I said. You want me to be useful. The room went silent. That is the truth, isn't it? I continued. You don't care if I lose my job. You don't care if I lose my savings. You don't care if I have a criminal record. As long as I serve the purpose of keeping you out of trouble, I am a good daughter. The moment I try to save myself, I am a traitor. My father's face twisted. We gave you everything. We raised you. You used me, I shouted. You used my name like a credit card you found on the sidewalk. I walked over to the desk in the corner, the command center of their fraud. I started pulling drawers open. What are you doing? My father yelled. Stepping toward me. Get away from there. I ignored him. I pulled out the file drawer. I grabbed a handful of papers. I was looking for something specific. I didn't know what it was until I saw it. It was a single sheet of paper, tucked into a folder marked Cliff. It was a printed checklist. I pulled it out. It wasn't a handwritten note scribbled in a moment of panic. It was a typed document, a step-by-step guide. Phase 1. Asset Protection 1. Establish new LLC. Hearthstone. 2. Assign officer with 700-plus credit score. GB. 3. Redirect mail to Pecan O. Box 404. 4. Open Northline account. Phase 2. Management 1. Sign power of attorney. Backdate to holiday visit. 2. Draft email correspondence from officer account to establish paper trail. 3. If questioned by officer, deny, delay, deflect. I stared at the words. If questioned by officer, deny, delay, deflect. It was a script. My hands shook as I held the paper up. You had a checklist, I said. My voice broke. You had a checklist for how to lie to me. My mother looked away. My father stared at the floor. It wasn't panic. I said, it wasn't an accident. It wasn't we were drowning. You planned it. You planned how to trick me. You planned how to steal from me. You wrote it down. I looked at the date on the bottom of the page. It was dated 3 weeks before the business was even formed. They had decided to ruin me before they had even signed the lease on the storefront. I folded the paper and put it in my pocket. "This is going to the IRS too," I said. Ethan walked into the room then. He had come from the hallway, awakened by the shouting. He was wearing t-shirt and boxers, looking young and scared. "Gabby," he said. I looked at him. I remembered the check. "Ethan Loan. You saw the mail, didn't you?" I asked him. He froze. "You saw the IRS letters coming to the house." I said, "You live here. You get the mail sometimes. You saw the letters addressed to me." He looked at Mom. Then he looked at me. "Yeah," he whispered. "And you didn't tell me? Mom said it would ruin Dad." He said, his voice cracking. "She said if you found out, you would close the business and Dad would have a heart attack. She said we had to protect him, so you protected him by feeding me to the wolves." I said, "We rehearsed it," he said. He started crying, silent tears running down his face. "We rehearsed what to say if you asked. Mom told me. Tell her she's imagining things. Tell her she's stressed." I looked at the three of them, a family bound together not by love, but by a conspiracy. I realized then that I wasn't losing a family. I was escaping a gang. I walked to the door. "Gabriella!" my mother screamed. "Please." I didn't turn back. I walked out into the cold night air. I got into my car. I locked the doors. As I backed out of the driveway, I saw them standing in the window. My mother was weeping. My father was leaning against the frame, looking like a man whose house had finally collapsed. Ethan was standing behind them, a shadow in the dark. I drove away. I didn't cry. I had no tears left. I only had the checklist in my pocket, burning against my leg like a brand. 3 weeks later, the letter came. It wasn't a certified demand for payment. It was a standard envelope from the Department of the Treasury. I opened it in my kitchen. The winter sun was streaming through the window, cold and bright. Department of the Treasury Internal Revenue Service. "Dear Miss Butler, based on the documentation provided, including the sworn affidavit and supporting evidence regarding the unauthorized use of your identity, we have made a preliminary determination that you are a victim of identity misuse regarding the entity, Hearthstone Ledger Works, LLC." I sat down on the floor. "We have placed a hold on all collection activities against your personal accounts. We are moving to remove the trust fund recovery penalty assessment from your Social Security number." The weight on my chest, the 20-ton weight that had been crushing me for 2 months, lifted. I could breathe. But then I read the next paragraph. "However, this determination is contingent upon your continued cooperation. The case has been referred to the Criminal Investigation Division, CID, for potential prosecution of the responsible parties. You may be subpoenaed to provide testimony before a federal grand jury regarding the involvement of David Butler, Susan Butler, and Clifford Hargrove." It wasn't over. It was just changing venues. I wasn't the defendant anymore. I was the witness. I put the letter down on the table. I was free. But the price of my freedom was the imprisonment of my parents. I checked my email. There was a message from Crestline HR. Subject: promotion status. "Dear Gabriella, we have received the update from your legal counsel regarding the preliminary IRS determination. In light of this, we are pleased to inform you that your application for the senior analyst position has been reactivated. However, per corporate policy, final approval is contingent upon the formal removal of the tax lien from the public record, which we understand may take another 60 to 90 days. We appreciate your patience as you resolve this personal matter." I stared at the screen. "We appreciate your patience." They were giving me the job back. But it felt tainted. I wasn't getting it because I was good at my job. I was getting it because I had successfully proved I wasn't a felon. My career, my reputation, my entire life was now defined by this disaster. I would always be the woman who had to sue her own parents to get a promotion. I closed the laptop. Relief hit me. Yes, but it was followed immediately by a surge of anger so hot it made my vision blur. I had spent my whole life trying to be good, trying to be the one who didn't cause trouble. And what had it gotten me? It had made me the perfect target. My phone buzzed. It was a text from Ethan. They arrested Cliff this morning. Mom and Dad are meeting with a public defender. Mom can't stop crying. She keeps asking for you. I didn't reply. I deleted the thread. I stood up and walked to the window. I looked out at the parking lot of my apartment complex. It was full of cars belonging to people who probably trusted their parents. People who went home for Thanksgiving and didn't have to wear a wire. I felt a profound sense of isolation. I was an orphan now, not by death, but by necessity. And then, there was a knock at the door. It wasn't the soft knock of a neighbor. It was 3 hard, authoritative raps. I froze. The IRS letter said collections were paused. It said I was cleared. I walked to the door. I looked through the peephole. It was a mail carrier, but not the usual one. This was a special courier. He was holding a large, flat envelope. I opened the door. "Gabriella Butler?" he asked. "Yes. Sign here." I signed the digital pad. He handed me the envelope. It was heavy. Much heavier than the first notice. I closed the door and looked at the return address. Department of Justice, Tax Division. Criminal Enforcement Section, Washington. D.C. My stomach dropped. I tore the tab on the envelope. I pulled out a thick packet of documents. The cover letter was clipped to the front. Subpoena duces tecum. You are hereby commanded to appear before the grand jury. I scanned down the page, and then I saw it, the paragraph that made the room spin. To provide testimony and documents regarding Hearthstone Ledgerworks, LLC, and any and all additional related entities listed below in which you are named as an officer, director, or agent. 1. Hearthstone Ledgerworks, LLC 2. Butler Family Holdings Trust 3. G.B. Real Estate Ventures, LLC 4. Merriwick Consulting Group. I stared at the list. G.B. Real Estate Ventures, Butler Family Holdings. There wasn't just one business. There were 4. They hadn't just used my name for the tax prep shop. They had used it for everything. They had built an entire fleet of shell companies. I dropped the papers. They scattered across the floor like dead leaves. I thought I had found the bottom. I thought I had cut the cancer out. But as I stood there in my silent apartment, staring at the list of companies I had never heard of, I realized the checklist I found in my father's desk wasn't the end of the plan. It was just page 1. The war wasn't over. It was just beginning. Thank you for listening to this part of the story. It is a heavy journey, realizing that the people who are supposed to protect us can sometimes be the ones we need protection from. I would love to hear your thoughts on Gabriella's choice. Did she do the right thing by turning them in? Or is family loyalty absolute? Please let me know in the comments where you are listening from, and what you would have done in her shoes. If you want to find out what happens with the new subpoenas and the criminal trial, make sure to subscribe to Revenge Stories. There is much more truth to uncover.